I don't know exactly when I started hating them. Maybe it was after months of hearing jokes about my strange name, the mean-spirited teasing during shifts, or the whispers that stopped as soon as I approached. I had been working at Dunkin' Donuts for almost a year, but that place seemed to drain every ounce of patience I had. They didn't notice, or pretended not to notice, how their words were eating away at me. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a phase, that things would get better with time. But the more I tried to fit in, the more invisible and disrespected I felt. Every laugh at my expense was like a silent blow, and I knew I couldn't take it much longer. So, I decided to do something about it. It wouldn't be obvious, nothing that could be traced back to me. During a delivery of ingredients, I noticed a hidden box in the back containing a white powder. It looked like refined sugar, but something about it was off. It smelled metallic, almost bitter. I asked the manager what it was, but he just muttered, "That's for special customers." Something in his voice made me hesitate, but it also gave me an idea. If it was bad enough to be used on special customers, it would be perfect for sending a message to my coworkers. That night, while preparing the donuts for the morning shift, I mixed the powder into some of the fillings. I carefully chose the flavors I knew my coworkers preferred: chocolate for Sarah, strawberry for Mike, vanilla for the manager. When I placed the trays in the display case, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Finally, they would pay for what they'd done. But then, something unexpected happened. Midway through the shift, while serving customers, I saw Sarah collapse to the floor, convulsing. Mike screamed for help, but before we could call an ambulance, he collapsed too. The manager, who had been drinking coffee in the office, stumbled out with purple lips and glazed eyes. He stared directly at me and said, in a hoarse, weak voice, "You have no idea what you've done." It hit me like a punch to the gut. In that moment, I realized I had made a colossal mistake. That wasn't refined sugar, it was something far worse. Later, I learned the powder was part of a larger criminal scheme, a highly toxic substance used to silence unwanted people. The manager had been involved in it, using Dunkin as a distribution point. He had chosen the special customers to be discreetly eliminated, and I, unknowingly, had sped up the plan. When the police arrived, all eyes turned to me. The cameras clearly showed I had tampered with the donuts, and none of the survivors could confirm my original intentions. I tried to explain that I didn't know what I was doing, that I thought it was just a cruel prank to scare my coworkers, but no one believed me. My attempt at revenge had turned into something much darker and more dangerous. Now, I'm locked up, trying to understand how everything went so wrong. Every time I see a coffee cup or a donut, I'm reminded of what I did, and the innocence I lost forever. In prison, time seems to stand still. The hours drag on as I relive that day over and over in my mind. I see Sarah's and Mike's faces, the panicked look in the manager's eyes before he collapsed. I try to convince myself that my intentions weren't so bad, I just wanted to send a message, to show them how their words hurt me. But that doesn't change the fact that my actions had terrible consequences. Sarah survived but was left with permanent disabilities. Mike wasn't so lucky. The manager, on the other hand, vanished completely from the news after the incident. They say he was part of something much bigger, a criminal network that used Dunkin as a front to poison unwanted people. I had no idea until it was too late. Now, as I try to cope with the consequences of my mistake, I realize I never truly understood who those people were. They weren't just coworkers or tormentors, they were pieces of a deadly game much larger than I could have imagined. And I, unwittingly, became another piece on that board, manipulated by the same forces I thought I was fighting against. Sometimes, late at night, when the silence of my cell is broken only by distant, muffled voices, I think about what might have happened if I had simply walked away that day, ignoring everything. Maybe Sarah and Mike would be okay, maybe the criminal scheme would have continued operating undetected. But there's no going back now. I'm trapped, not just physically, but also by the weight of the choices I made, choices I'll never be able to undo. Sometimes, I try to imagine how my life might have been different if I had reacted another way. Maybe I could have found another job or confronted my coworkers directly instead of giving in to anger and resentment. But the truth is, there's no room for what ifs. The damage is done, and now I have to live with it. During visits in prison, my mother can barely look at me. She always says I'm better than this, but I know she's disappointed too. I can't blame her. I barely recognize myself when I look in the mirror. The person who first walked into that Dunkin' Donuts, full of hope, however small, feels like a stranger to me now. Every day, I wonder if I'll ever be able to forget those moments, the sound of Sarah hitting the floor, Mike's screams, the accusing look in the manager's eyes before he succumbed. I know this guilt will follow me for the rest of my life, along with the scars I left on the people affected by my actions. And, ironically, I now realize I never hated my coworkers as much as I thought. The hatred I felt was just a shadow of what really consumed me, loneliness, the feeling of not belonging. Now, trapped in this place, I finally understand the weight of the choices I made. But this understanding comes too late, long after any chance to fix what was broken. It was my first day working the drive-thru, and I was nervous, trying to quickly learn how everything worked. The line of cars was calm that morning until one vehicle caught my attention. It stopped at the intercom position, but no one said anything. I waited a few seconds, thinking maybe the customer was deciding on their order or distracted by something. But the silence continued. I decided to go check, thinking there might be some technical issue with the system. As I approached the car, I saw a man alone in the driver's seat, motionless, as if he were sleeping. I gently knocked on the window to get his attention. He slowly opened his eyes, with a distant expression, and said only, "I didn't ask to come here." Before I could ask what he meant, he suddenly got out of the car and started running, leaving the engine running and the door wide open. Confused and alarmed, I got into the car to see if something was wrong. Maybe he wasn't feeling well or needed help. But what I found disturbed me even more. On the passenger seat, there was a half-open backpack filled with fake documents scattered inside. Among them, a detailed map showed delivery routes of the fast food chain where I worked, marked with notes and symbols I couldn't understand. It looked like something out of a spy movie, but there it was, right in front of me. I didn't know what to think or what to do with it. I decided to call my supervisor, but something deep down told me this incident wasn't normal, and that I had probably just stumbled into something much bigger than I realized. The next day, as I tried to make sense of what had happened, I discovered something even more unsettling. The police showed up at the restaurant during the morning shift, asking about the abandoned car and the man who fled. They explained that he was wanted for using fast food networks as collection points for smuggling. The maps and detailed routes were used to coordinate illegal deliveries, and that specific drive-thru had been chosen for its strategic location. "He was using your restaurant as a front," one of the detectives said, examining the confiscated backpack. I froze hearing that. On my very first day of work, I had already gotten involved in something much bigger than just serving burgers and fries. The officers assured me I wasn't in danger, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lingering in the air. For the rest of the week, I noticed unfamiliar cars slowly passing through the parking lot and strange people watching from a distance. My supervisor assured me this happened often. After all, the restaurant was in a busy area, but I knew it was different. It felt like someone was keeping an eye on me, monitoring every move. I started questioning whether I should keep working there. What seemed like a simple job was now turning into a web of secrets and hidden dangers behind fake smiles and quick orders. The following days were a mix of paranoia and reflection. I tried to focus on work, but every car that pulled into the drive-thru made me hesitate. Was it another smuggler? Or someone seeking revenge for the man who ran away? My co-workers noticed my nervousness and started making jokes, saying I was too stressed for the first month. But how could they understand? I had been thrown into a situation I had no idea how to handle. During my lunch break, I went back to the police station, asking if there was anything else I should know. The detective looked at me seriously and said, "You did what you could by handing over the documents. Now, just be careful, these people don't play around." His words only heightened my unease. I decided to change some habits to feel safer. I started taking different routes home from work, avoided being alone in the parking lot, and kept my phone close at hand. Still, that feeling of being watched never completely left me. Sometimes, when I passed by the drive-through window or saw an unfamiliar car in line, a chill ran down my spine. I knew that first day had changed something inside me. It wasn't just a temporary job to pay the bills anymore, now it was a constant reminder that the world is far more complicated and dangerous than it seems. And no matter how hard I tried to move on, I knew I'd never see that place the same way again. Even with time passing, the feeling of being involved in something bigger than myself never left me. One night, as I was leaving work, I noticed a black car parked in the distance, its headlights off. There was no one inside, but something about the way it was positioned, as if it were watching me, made my heart race. I quickly got into my own car and drove home, checking my rearview mirror several times to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows, something I'd never done before. I knew it was paranoia, but I also knew I couldn't ignore the silent warning that incident represented. Today, months later, I still work at the same drive-thru, but nothing feels the same. Every customer I serve, every car that pulls into the line, carries with it a shadow of that first experience. I've learned that not everything is what it seems, and that even everyday places can hide dark secrets. Sometimes, when I see a map hanging on the wall or come across an unusual order, I remember the man who ran away and the words he muttered, "I didn't ask to come here." I now realize that, in a way, both of us were forced into something much bigger than our simple lives. And though I survived that situation, I know it left marks that will never fully fade. The first day of work was supposed to be just a beginning, but for me, it was the start of something I never asked to face. I worked the morning shift at Dunkin' Donuts, and I always thought I knew the stockroom well. I was familiar with every shelf, box, and ingredient like the back of my hand. But that morning, while organizing the shelves, I found something I'd never seen before, a hidden box tucked behind sacks of flour. It seemed deliberately placed there to avoid being noticed. When I opened it, I found sealed packages containing a white powder with handwritten labels that read, "For exclusive use." It didn't look like regular sugar, it was finer, almost shimmering under the light. I asked the manager about it, but he just muttered, avoiding eye contact, "That's none of your business." His response only made me more intrigued and uneasy. It was as if he was trying to shut down the conversation before it even began. Later, while cleaning the counter, I overheard two employees whispering about special deliveries and VIP customers. They stopped abruptly when they realized I was nearby, but it was too late, their words lingered in my mind. I knew something strange was going on, something that went beyond the coffee and donuts we served every day. Days later, I uncovered the truth. The place was being used as a distribution point for synthetic drugs disguised as refined sugar. The white powder I had found wasn't a culinary ingredient, it was part of a carefully orchestrated criminal scheme, and I, unknowingly, had been working at the center of it all. The discovery left me torn between fear and curiosity. I knew I should distance myself, maybe even find another job, but something inside me wanted to understand more about what was happening. After all, this was my workplace, a place I thought was safe and predictable. How could I have been so blind? I started paying closer attention to patterns. Certain customers would show up at specific times, always ordering custom combinations that never involved food or drinks. They discreetly exchanged envelopes with the manager or some employees, as if it were routine. No one seemed to notice, or pretended not to, except me. But the more I observed, the more dangerous everything seemed. One night, as I was leaving work, I noticed a black car parked across the street with two men sitting inside. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about them, but something about the way they stared at the restaurant sent chills down my spine. The next day, I casually mentioned the car and the VIP customers to a coworker, trying to sound uninterested. He gave me a serious look and said simply, "If I were you, I'd forget what I saw." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. It was clear I already knew too much, and now I was treading on dangerous ground. Dunkin' Donuts was no longer just a place to make a living, it was a front for something much bigger, and I had no idea how to escape it. The following days were tormenting. I tried to act normally, carrying out my tasks as I always had, but my mind was constantly on edge. Every time the manager or coworkers mentioned special deliveries, I felt a tightness in my chest. I knew I had to make a decision, keep pretending nothing was wrong or seek help. But who could I turn to? If I went to the police, I risked exposure, and I'd likely be seen not as a victim but as an accomplice for having worked there for so long without reporting anything earlier. But if I stayed silent, I knew I'd be putting my safety at risk. After all, those men in the black car already seemed to have their eyes on me. I decided to do some discreet investigating. During my shifts, I began jotting down times, names, when possible, and details about the suspicious deliveries. I kept these notes in a hidden notebook in my bag, far from the restaurant. At night, I researched synthetic drugs and criminal operations involving fast food chains. What I found was even more terrifying. There were cases in other states where franchises were used as fronts for distributing illegal substances. It seemed organized, efficient, and extremely dangerous. Deep down, I knew I was playing with fire, but I also knew I couldn't just ignore what I had uncovered. I had to decide how far I was willing to go, and whether it would be worth paying the price for it. Finally, I decided to seek help. I chose a police station far from my neighborhood, where no one knew me, and handed over my notes to a detective. He listened attentively, but I could see in his eyes that he already knew more than he let on. "This network is bigger than you think," he said seriously. "If they find out you talked, you'll be in danger." He advised me to stay away from the restaurant and promised to investigate discreetly. I left the station relieved to have done something, but also scared about what might happen next. Since then, I've completely changed my routine. I avoid going near the Dunkin' Donuts, take different routes to work, and always look over my shoulder. Today, months later, I still don't know if any arrests were made or if the operation was dismantled. But the feeling of being watched has never fully left me. Sometimes, when I see a black car parked in a strange spot or notice someone staring at me for too long, I'm transported back to those days at Dunkin' Donuts. I've learned that not everything is what it seems and that even the most ordinary places can hide dark secrets. Though I tried to do the right thing, I know the consequences of that decision may stay with me forever. What started as a simple job turned into a bitter lesson about how fragile the line between normalcy and danger can be, and how, sometimes, the cost of opening your eyes is far greater than we imagine.